As usual, we'll commence with our opening prayers. And the main purpose of this is to stabilize our mind and then focus it upon the great goal of enlightenment for the benefit of others. So thank you, Lou.
Okay, let me just get prepared, which I should have been prepared, but now I am. Okay, hold on. Okay. Opening prayers, taking refuge in generating bodhicitta. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Abandon evil doing, practice virtue well, subdue your mind. This is the Buddha's teaching. Like a star, an optical illusion, or a flame, a magical illusion, a dewdrop, or a bubble, like a dream, a flash of lightning, or a cloud, so should one consider all compounded things. By this merit may we attain omniscience and overcome our enemy, our harmful deeds. May beings buffeted by the waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death be liberated from the ocean of existence. I prostrate to the Arya triple gem. Thus did I hear at one time the Bhagavan was dwelling on Master Vulture's mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan was absorbed in a concentration on the categorized phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara, looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom, beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, to the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara. How should any son of the lineage train wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara said this to the Venerable Shariputra. Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter lineage wish to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty. Emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness. No eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind. No visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no I element, and so on, up to and including no mind element and no mental consciousness element. There's no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there's no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the endpoint of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly are completely awakened to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment and reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth since it's not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared. Taya to Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhi Soha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Avalokitesvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage. It is like that, it is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom, just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagavan having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharadvati Putra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Avalokitesvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised, thus spoken by the Bhagavan. Praise to Manjushri. Homage to my Guru and protector Manjushri, who holds to his heart a scriptural text, symbolic of his seeing of all things as they are, whose understanding shines forth as the sun, unclouded by delusions or traces of ignorance, who teaches in 60 ways the loving compassion of a father for his only son. All creatures caught in the prison of samsara, confused in the darkness of their ignorance, overwhelmed by their suffering. You whose dragon thunder-like proclamation of Dhamma arouses us from the stupor of our delusions and frees us from the iron chains of our karma, who wields the sword of wisdom, hewing down suffering wherever its sprouts appear, clearing away the darkness of all ignorance. You whose princely body is adorned with the 112 marks of a Buddha, who has completed the 10 stages, achieving the highest perfections of a Bodhisattva, who has been pure from the beginning, I bow down to you, Manjushri. Om Rapsanadi. With the brilliance of your wisdom, O compassionate one, illuminate the darkness closing my mind, enlighten my intelligent wisdom, so that I may gain insight to the Buddha's words and the texts that explain them. By the virtue of offering to you assembly of Buddhas visualized before me, this mandala built on a base resplendent with flowers, saffron, water, and incense, adorned with Mount Meru and the 4 continents, as well as the sun and the moon, may all sentient beings share in its good effects. Please enjoy and bless me and all sentient beings to be released from the 3 poisonous minds, for I am offering without attachment my body, enemies, friends, and strangers, and all possessions without the objects of my greed, ignorance, and hatred. O holy and venerable Lama, from the clouds of compassion that form in the skies of your Dhammakama wisdom, please release the rain of vast and profound Dhamma, precisely in accordance with the needs of those to be trained. Idam Guru Ratna, Madalakam Niyatayami. I send forth this jeweled mandala to you, precious gurus.
So I'll just spend a few moments quietly preparing our motivation for listening and sharing the Dharma today. Letting go of all impure motivations, particularly those circulating around our self-cherishing, and exchanging these for a deep, profound concern from the very depths of our heart for the welfare of all sentient beings, not leaving a single one out. And with that, we can commence the session. I just want to sort of preface the session a little bit. I've had a somewhat challenging week because I've had a very, very close friend diagnosed with a serious cancerous tumor. And it's entered that waiting period of having to schedule extensive tests and so forth. And so my friend's mind has been up and down. I should imagine a lot of that has to do with coming to terms with shock. And my advice, my humble advice as a friend, has been to take one step at a time, not to panic, and also to listen to your own self, your own needs. And this isn't intended to be a selfish sort of observation at all, but not to run ahead of yourself and lose yourself in the midst of some sort of concern that all is going to come undone. So it's really a wake-up call. I remember when I had my own cancer diagnosis that as my illness developed incrementally in exquisite stages, as is the case often with blood cancers, your cancer is not visible from the outside. It's not even visible to you looking at your body, but your condition in the very depths of your marrow in this case is declining, deteriorating. The energy is failing. And so I found myself becoming weaker and weaker. And this weakness was very much physical because the hemoglobin's role in the blood is to carry oxygen around the body and therefore keep all the cells active. But in my case, I wasn't able to carry oxygen because my hemoglobin was the cells affected by the cancer. So for that reason, even though I was breathing, I was actually slowly asphyxiating. And the outcome of that experientially was pernicious acute anemia, just an absolute abysmal exhaustion. So why do I mention this? It's because I had no choice under those circumstances other than to begin to refocus acutely towards what I could do and what I could control. And perhaps rather happily, you'll hear that that was my own mind. I still had the capacity to work with my mind in a creative and dynamic way. And so to cut the story short, my Dharma practice intensified sort of inevitably because of the changing circumstances I was in. But it was when I recovered a number of years later, following my stem cell transplant, I watched with some amazement the deterioration of my awareness of death and impermanence as my body became stronger. And whereas before my stem cell transplant, I got to the point where I would no longer wish to buy an item of clothing for myself because I thought there's going to be no body to put this clothing on. Therefore, it's a waste of time being concerned about my clothes. I found myself shopping again. Not to say I'm a sort of compulsive shopper, but I'm just trying to point out that my focus was swinging around again. So with the news about my very dear friend, it's all come rushing back again, and I'm feeling very, very aware of how precious every single moment is. So I know we all know this and we know it intellectually, but it's curious how an actual awareness of it existentially is something else. It resonates in a way that really can't be described. So this doesn't take us away at all from today's topic. In fact, it swings us directly into it because Shantideva is discussing the benefits of guarding mindfulness and alertness, and through that, guarding our own minds. So these are the facilities that we have at our disposal and in our hands, if you like, even if we find ourselves in incredibly trying and challenging circumstances. So the benefits of guarding these qualities of the mind is equivalent to explaining why we practice Dharma. It's actually the workings of the practice of our Dharma. It's how we work to practice Dharma. So the verse relating to this is 21. If one lives by such a conduct, one is suitable to abide amongst ruling people or amongst women. The stability of striving in the vows will not degenerate. So the message we're to draw from this verse is that it is not the unruly people or even women who are the problem, but our own minds, particularly our own lack of the conduct of suitable restraint on our part. If we do maintain such restraint, then it will be free to move through situations that might otherwise have brought us unstuck or undone. Gyaltsabje's commentary reads, if one continually practices stopping the afflictions, the stability of the mind striving in the vows will not degenerate, regardless of whether one abides in the midst of unruly people with much anger, or whether one abides in the vicinity of a woman with much attachment. Now, I have to sort of point out here, as it's glaringly obvious, that Shantideva is making an assumption, a glaring assumption in some ways, that the reader of this verse is a heterosexual male. Be that as it may, the example of restraint, even in the midst of women, is unfortunately always timely. In Australia, in the state of Victoria, in our central regional towns, there's been a spate in the last 3 months of the murder of women, often in their own domestic environments. So these have shocked the local community to the extent that the townspeople have been marching in the street saying women have to be safe, have to be able to walk the streets without, and have to be able to live in their homes, even with their partners, without the risk of any physical danger or assault or mental abuse and so forth. So these are real issues. But though it does seem that Shantideva is warning that the male libido is by nature inclined to be rampant, given the slightest lessening of any restraint, I feel that we, in our modern sort of context, can interpret this more generally to capture the tyranny of any unbridled or rampant desire that might manifest in any of its myriad forms or constellations. The point, if one continually practices preventing the afflictions from arising, we'll find that the afflictions can be quelled, can be worked with. But this is only the case if we're applying our mindfulness on a continuous basis. Therefore, we need to continuously practice preventing the afflictions from arising, and then, as Gyaltsabje says, the stability of the mind striving in the vows will not degenerate. So the way to protect our vows is to apply the antidotes to the afflictions on a continuous basis. Then, regardless of whether one abides in the midst of an angry, unruly people, or whether one abides in the vicinity of a beautiful goddess, it will not affect one's mind in terms of afflictions. Here again, we need to recall that Shantideva is giving his advice to fully ordained monks. And so I feel that we need to frame his examples and illustrations within this context. Nevertheless, Shantideva's advice applies to all who are striving to guard their mind and to practice the Dharma. And this is to also say, of course, that women are also needing to maintain watch over their desires, whatever their nature may be. Geshe Jumpa Gatso relates a story that exemplifies the problem of forfeiting one's vows due to desire. The story. If we do not guard our mind, even if we live alone on a mountain peak, we will give up our vows. There is a story about a monk who did retreat for many years. One night he had a vision of a dakini who told him to go early the next morning to a forest in the valley where he would meet a woman whom he should have sexual intercourse with, whereby he would achieve liberation. The next day, he woke up early, had breakfast, and went to the forest where he saw a woman who was not very beautiful, but thinking that she was a dakini, he walked up to her and embraced her. The woman yelled that she was not a dakini, but he insisted she was and that she had sexual intercourse with him. She told him that since he was a meditator and a monk, he should not have intercourse with her. However, he insisted, so much so that in the end they had intercourse, due to which he finished his monkhood as well as his retreat. After that, he lived together with a woman whose husband, a farmer, had died, and they had a child. He had to spend the rest of his life working as a farmer, as well as cutting wood in the forest, and so forth, in order to support his family. And then Geshe Jumpa Gatso concludes, sometimes visions are not to be believed. So putting aside the colourful and perhaps apocryphal dimensions of this story, the central point here does concern guarding the vows and commitments that one has taken. Of course, if those who have taken ordination do not guard their minds against the afflictions, then the vows will be given up, can be given up at a later stage, in some cases very quickly. This is the point of Geshe Jumpa Gyatso's story. However, in a broader sense, the point relates to any vows, the lay person's vows, the self-ordination vows, the Bodhisattva vows, and the tantric vows, many of which we may have taken. So the best method, the only method to effectively guard and protect these vows from degenerating, is to continually practice mindfulness, to stop the afflictions, and to apply antidotes to them as they arise, when they arise. This will help stabilize the mind so that the vows won't degenerate. His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, says, how are we to guard the mind? We should use attentiveness to watch our thoughts and use mindfulness to judge whether we are acting correctly. With these two, we have the means to annihilate all adverse conditions. But without them, we will not see whether our thoughts are positive or negative, or whether we are doing right or wrong. nor will we then be able to use antidotes as necessary. So the next heading in Gyaltsab Sabje's outline is generating mindfulness to guard the mind wholeheartedly. And this pertains to verse 22, which reads, "It is better to be without wealth, honour, body, and livelihood. And it is better to let other virtues deteriorate rather than ever let the virtues of the mind decline." Gyaltsab Sabje's commentary reads, "Although one gains no food, clothing, and the like, receives no praise such as veneration, and has no livelihood to support body and life, that is easy. To lose virtue unprotected by the mind is easy as well. But the mind of the great vehicle practitioner should not be allowed to degenerate under any circumstances." So this mention of how easy it is to lose or surrender virtue, our virtue, is perhaps disarming, as we do like to think we are in firm control. But how true or real is this? This is the question we must ask ourselves, but not just once. Shantideva is arguing that it is much, much more important to maintain one's virtues than worry about the availability of resources such as wealth, honour, body, and livelihood. Though these usually preoccupy us, dominate us, we might add, they are in fact trivial concerns, as they are fugitive and fleeting and almost invariably tied up with the machinations of our emotional afflictions. I'm just thinking of my sort of response to clothes here. I did renounce clothes when I was aware that I maybe couldn't be wearing them in a couple of weeks' time. But it took that kind of a jolt to get me to that point of giving up the desire for clothing. So you can see how subtle and insidious these framing mechanisms of desire are in shaping the way we view ourselves and our agency in the world. So we're really being invited here to take several steps back from this interface and begin to work with the technical structures, if you like, the apparatus that we have at our disposal to work with our mind in a creative and positive way. This, of course, is a great, great gift, a great treasure to be aware of. So what is really important is maintaining our vows and commitments in such a way that they are not contaminated or stained by worldly dharmas, habitual worldly concerns. Hence, it is due to their vital importance that we work to not let them deteriorate under any circumstances, as Gyaltsab Sabje puts it. Geshe Doga indicates that this larger point, not to let them degenerate under any circumstances, can be brought into a very close and immediate focus, one concerning our Bodhisattva conduct. How do we conduct our Bodhisattva's conduct? Geshe Doga says, while we may not yet have developed bodhicitta, any level of kindness, particularly the mind wishing to benefit others, is, as I regularly emphasize, a really precious mind. So Geshe Doga is saying here that we might not have generated bodhicitta, but we have some degree, some level of kindness and compassion, particularly the wish to benefit in others. And these are really precious minds. Geshe Doga says, When they are further developed, we develop love and compassion, which serves as a cause to develop bodhicitta. The greater the wish to benefit others, the greater the conditions for our bodhicitta will be. Once developed, of course, the bodhicitta attitude will be sustained by continually wishing to benefit others. Therefore, one should not, under any circumstances, underestimate this state of mind of kindness and wishing to benefit others. So we're taking one step back from the task of holding on to our vows and commitments, which are one thing, but we're saying even to hold on to our minds of loving kindness and compassion as we currently have them are the most precious things to hold and to treasure and to cultivate. So this is actually very, very inspiring because it cuts through, I think, in so many different ways, the usual structures of our self-grasping, self-cherishing ego. Indeed, such bodhicitta goals will be simply impossible to achieve if we don't fastidiously cultivate and grow our wish to benefit others in each and every situation. So always a realist and therefore always immensely practical in his advice, Geshe Doga proposes that if we can't proceed on this basis of an awakening thought, then at least we aim to live according to its more achievable substitute, which is our resolve not to harm another being. This is really, really boiling it down. At least can we achieve that? Can we use mindfulness and introspection to maintain that capacity not to harm a single other sentient being? So the next heading is guarding mindfulness and introspection, which are the methods regarding the mind. And that's further broken down into two subdivisions, showing or the presentation, and secondly, explaining. And showing, which is demonstrating, brings us to verse 23. Oh, you who wish to guard your minds, I beseech you with folded hands, always exert yourself to guard mindfulness and alertness. This is pungent. Shantideva is beseeching us, pleading with us with folded hands. And this brings home how intensely important it is to actually follow this advice, not to merely pay lip service. It means that if we fail to guard our mindfulness and alertness, we are letting us, not just ourselves down, but as Shantideva himself is going to indicate, we are going to be letting down all sentient beings. This is because our bodhicitta motivation will have deteriorated or been impaired. So without question, we are therefore to accept that maintaining mindfulness and alertness is of vital importance as we go about every activity of which our lives are composed, whether actions of body, speech, or mind. Berzin offers a valuable contextual distinction between mindfulness and alertness in the context of this verse. In this context, mindfulness means to be mindful of all that one has accepted to relinquish and to cultivate. So this is really referring to the operation, isn't it, of how we maintain our vows, but also how we conduct ourselves ethically. Alertness means to be skillful in applying ourselves to this relinquishment and cultivation. So to put more broadly, perhaps, with mindfulness, we hold on to that which we have determined to adopt and reject. We hold on to the situation clearly so that we can determine what it is to hold on to and reject. We're mindful, in other words, of the situation. Alertness works within this arena and checks and ensures that our capacity to put aside what we don't want to engage in and to adopt what we do is actually held securely and can be therefore cultivated, made familiar. Put another way, we can say that alertness monitors the quality of mindfulness itself. It just checks. As Nagarjuna says in a letter to a friend, stanza 25, O Lord, the Sagata taught that mindfulness of the body is the sole path to be traversed. Pay attention and guard it. Due to mindfulness degenerating, all qualities will be destroyed. In this way, we can appreciate how both mindfulness and alertness are equally important and must work in tandem if we're to successfully guard our minds and the actions of our body and speech, which are incumbent on our mental state. Gyaltsabje paraphrases Shantideva's exhortation, his direct pleading to us. He says, you who wish to guard your mind, since one cannot guard one's own mind if one is separated from mindfulness and introspection, do not let the mindfulness that does not forget the virtuous object and the introspection that analyzes the situation of the three doors degenerate. I, called Shantideva, request this with my hands folded. Actually, if you stop to think about this for a moment, it's quite remarkable. It's quite a remarkable honor, even, to be directly petitioned by Shantideva in this earnest way. It means we must have accumulated at some point, or points in the past, considerable good karma, as otherwise would simply not find ourselves in this fortunate position of being looked after and guided by such a great realized yogi as Shantideva. So Shantideva's directly speaking to us right now, directly in this moment. How remarkable is that? So that Shantideva's appeal has reached us so many centuries later renders this fact, this collection of rare circumstances, even more remarkable, as many of us were not even born into a central country, meaning one where the Dharma and the Mahayana Dharma was to be found already existent. So I'm referring here to the cultural transmission of the Dharma into the Western context. It's only just got underway, and we're right on that nodal point at the moment. But what an incredible blessing it is to be alive at this moment of this pure transmission of the Holy Dharma into our own cultural settings. This great good fortune, one that indicates that we have indeed attained a precious human rebirth, clearly puts great onus upon us to open our hearts and to let Shantideva's exhortation sink deeply in. If we create the conditions to sincerely practice in this way, we'll be assisting the Dharma to take root in countries where it might before have been remote or be simply a word found in a history book or in a chapter in a book on a dusty library shelf somewhere. In other words, the teachings are alive and we're in contact with that living tradition. Gyaltsabje's next heading is explaining, subheading is explaining, and this is subdivided into two further subdivisions: the faults of lacking introspection, and guarding mindfulness as the method of introspection. And the first of these, the faults of lacking introspection, is itself subdivided into 5, which I'll enumerate. Any action devoid of introspection lacks power. One does not generate pure wisdom. One does not generate pure morality. Earlier accumulated merit or virtue is destroyed. And lastly, it obstructs the achievement of virtue not accumulated earlier, meaning it's harder to perform virtue because we haven't been performing it in the past. So any action devoid of introspection lacks power pertains to verse 24, which reads, "People who are disturbed by sickness have no strength to do anything usefully. Likewise, those whose minds are disturbed by confusion have no strength to do anything wholesome." So the subheading renders the meaning here very clearly. The analogy of the person too sick to work, perhaps a farmer who toils in the field, works by illustrating how a confused person, meaning a person with an ignorant or unwise mind, lacks strength to accomplish anything wholesome. Of course, we know this from personal experience. The anything in the last line refers to virtuous actions. Therefore, without vigilance applied to activities of our body, speech, and mind, we'll be unable to accomplish anything of much value, of much potency. This will be even more the case if our mind is overwhelmed by ignorance. In this case, ignorance is referring to a knowledge of what is to be adopted and what is to be rejected. So moving now to the second subheading, one does not generate pure wisdom. Verse 25. Whatever has been learnt, contemplated and meditated upon by those whose minds lack alertness, just like water in a leaking vase, will not be retained in their memory. So again, the meaning is clear. Our capacity to remain mindful depends, as earlier indicated, upon introspection or vigilance. If our vigilance is lacking, if we allow our mind to float away from its mindfulness, then how can we generate wisdom, especially profound wisdom that requires intensely powerful, focused meditation or concentration? So the image of the leaking vessel is found at the beginning of the Lam Rim instructions concerning how we're to appropriately conduct ourselves while listening or teaching the Dharma. So it comes right at the beginning of the Lam Rim presentation. And that's indicating that it has to come right at the beginning of our own stance as we proceed to do our listening practice or our teaching practice. As Bongka Rinpoche says in Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand, a vessel may be neither upturned nor filthy, referring to other faults of listening, but if the bottom leaks, it will not retain any liquid, regardless of how much has been poured into it. Your ears may be taking in everything, and your motivation may be faultless, but unless you listen carefully, you will immediately forget everything. It is very difficult to take measures to prevent forgetting a teaching. So we must use something as a reminder, a book or a set of headings, for example, which is exactly what we're doing at the moment. We must continually go over the material by thinking what was taught on this particular point. More importantly, Pabonka says, you should get together with your colleagues between teaching sessions and go over a little of what's said. So this is really, really crucial advice. And that discussion can be a chat over the phone or by SMS or a small group get together in our local Dharma centre, whatever. How valuable it is to hear the reflections of others on that particular presentation or topic. So as Pabonka Rinpoche indicates, it means that we're not allowing ourselves to be fully present if we don't engage sufficiently and intensely enough with the very act of listening or teaching. Because we're not paying sufficient attention, we're like a leaking bucket. No matter how deep or meaningful the Dharma words we're listening to are, they'll run straight through us and into the ground, as it were. This is a loss much greater than running out of even our last mouthful of food. This is the real loss. There's a very beautiful verse in Ashvaghos's Aspiration in 70 stanzas, which says, "May I walk over a bed of burning coals, even to hear one word of the precious Dharma." That describes how real and how intense our sort of attitude should be. So, what form should introspection therefore take to circumvent such wastage, such loss of opportunity? Geshe Doga asks us to ask ourselves, what are the thoughts occurring in my mind? How am I conducting my physical actions? What kind of speech am I uttering? So you can see here that this question making is defining the tableau in which our mindfulness and introspection are intact, but particularly our introspection is in play because it's able to evaluate the nature of what is appearing at that particular time. So Geshe Doga says one must check on the basis of distinguishing between what is to be adopted and what is to be discarded, then analyze how one is conducting oneself through one's body, through one's speech, and through one's mind. And so there's a clear point here, isn't there, sort of embedded in it, in Geshe Doga's words, that there can be a disjunction between what we're planning to do, such as maintain our ethical practice, and what we're actually saying to someone that's hurting them. You know, on the one hand, we've promised not to hurt another person, but here we are abusing someone. Abuse can take many, many forms, and they can be very, very subtle. So if someone flinches in pain when they hear our words, we're receiving a very clear message that we've allowed our body, our speech, and our mind to run unfettered in this situation. It's quite shocking to consider. So in a meditation setting, having applied mindfulness and identified the object and focused on it, after a while, says Geshe Doga, we check that we're still keeping our focus on the chosen object, and we do this via introspection. So if our mind has wandered off, Geshe Doga continues, and we've become distracted, then it is through introspection that we'll notice that, and we'll then realize we need to reapply, reassert mindfulness. This approach is being explained here, says Geshe Doga, in terms of mindfulness in our daily lives with our body, speech, and mind. So we're taking the model of our meditational practice and then extending that outwards to discover the entire terrain of our everyday lives. We should be conducting ourselves in exactly the same way. And unless we train ourselves in meditation, we're going to find it more or less difficult to maintain mindfulness and vigilance in the course of everyday activities. So that's a reason why it's very good to meditate, of course. So another problem, again, a very real problem, is that one does not generate pure morality. Shantideva pursues this point by focusing directly on morality here. In verse 26, even those who have much learning, faith and willing perseverance will become defiled by a moral fall due to the mistake of lacking alertness. The fact that Shantideva has presented this proneness, this vulnerability to moral downfall and defilement by giving the example of an otherwise exemplary practitioner, one who is well learnt, faithful, and endowed with enthusiastic perseverance, is intended as a powerful cautionary tale, not to become conceited, thinking that we're much more advanced in our practice than we actually are. It's these moments when mindfulness and vigilance lapse that we recognize that we've got some distance to travel. All inestimable good qualities will effectively come to naught if introspection lapses. Why? Because it is in this very moment, in this gap, in scrupulously guarding our own mind, that the afflicted minds seize the opportunity to manifest. That's sort of almost sort of filmic, that sort of scenario. It's almost a horror film scenario. You open up the drawer and a gremlin pops out. But the point we're making here is that we've so habituated to negative ways of viewing and not caring for others that it takes minimal circumstances to trigger the reinforcement of those very negative behaviors. Geshe Doga mentions that those ordained ones who give up their vows, some of whom are very learned and committed Dharma practitioners. So this is the same point that Geshe Gatso had made in reference to that slightly earlier verse. Clearly then, the failure to maintain alertness is to be somewhat feared. The purpose, for example, of the 6-session yoga practice with its enumeration of vows, etc., is therefore specifically designed to maintain continuity of mindfulness and introspection throughout the day and night. So the emphasis here in the 6-session practice is on the continuity itself, hence the emphasis to practice 6 times daily. This is a way of anchoring our practice into the fabric of our lived existence, if you like. And The next fault is that earlier accumulated virtue is destroyed. And this is represented by verse 27. The thieves of unalertness, in following upon the decline of mindfulness, will steal even the merits I have firmly gathered, so that I will then proceed to the lower realms. Again, this is a matter to be taken seriously. Without introspection, we are in grave danger of wiping out our stronghold of accumulated virtue, assuming that there is something there to actually preserve. And I happily have to say that yes, there is, because he wouldn't have been beseeched by Shantideva directly a few verses ago if that wasn't the case. So we're returning to that idea of merit. What does merit mean? So the loss of introspection here is illustrated by the analogy of a thief who, upon noticing our guard is down, there's an opening in the fence, the door's being left unlocked, and that our mindfulness is therefore deteriorated or self gone out the door, it reaches forth, the thief reaches forth because it's suddenly unopposed and can seize and take exactly what it wishes to steal. So we shouldn't underestimate the importance of safeguarding our merit, because it is the very fuel of our progression on the Bodhisattva's path to full enlightenment. Hence the refuge verse, which we recited at the beginning of this session. Thank you, Lou. Until enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, with the merit I earn through generosity and so on. May I gain Buddhahood for the sake of all beings. How many times have we read that verse? You know, we get through that, chomp through that one in order to get onto our main practice. What is embodied there is absolutely extraordinary. It's through the merit that we earn, through practicing, that we gain the capacity to gain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. That's why we're practicing. So why would we leave our merit unprotected, unsecured? It makes absolutely no sense. We must appreciate here that an accumulation of merit gives impetus to accrue increasing accumulations of merit. We have a snowball effect here, which is quite wondrous, which can offset the more disastrous snowball effect of non-virtues compounding upon non-virtues. So as J. Tsongkhapa said, it, referring to bodhicitta, is like a philosopher's stone for the two collections. It gives you the merit to gather a huge stock of virtue. So the subject here is now bodhicitta. It is the philosopher's stone in this context. It is the supreme form of accumulating merit. It causes a continual exponential growth of our spiritual practice. Be that as it may, when we later realize that through an outburst of anger, whatever, might be pride or whatever, we have obliterated or can have obliterated in a single swipe, as it were, large collections of merit. We might indeed recognize the enormity of what has just occurred and be filled with regret. But the appalling fact is that our merit has already been taken away from us by the unmitigated formation and accomplishment, if you like, of that afflicted moment of mind. So, as Shantideva puts it, that merit has been stolen away. We weren't looking. The sad, even tragic implication or consequence of this loss of merit may be that we will fall into the lower realms. So again, Shantideva's really shaking the foundations of our false security here and saying we have to be on our toes in these matters. And of course, again, from a Bodhicitta perspective, we have to ensure that we have a human rebirth in order to, a precious human rebirth, in order to practice six perfections or higher states of rebirth. But we really have to take responsibility for ensuring that we do, because if we do fall into the lower realms, then our opportunities and scope to work for the benefit of others is almost completely crushed. So it is for this reason that Gyaltsabje turns the situation around and starts with the moment the horses bolted, as it were. He says, in case mindfulness weakens and does leave, so it's gone, we've missed the moment, remind yourselves of the sufferings of the lower realms and immediately protect the house of the mind again. So in that moment of loss, we galvanize a resolve not to let that happen again, and we redetermine our bodhicitta motivation, and we take our next step firmly and confidently on the path. The implication is that we must immediately utilize this moment of loss as one in which we move to swiftly protect the house of the mind. And I think this image of the house of the mind is a very apt one, because it invites us to consider how we must watch the three doors of body, speech, and mind. So we do that by watching our mind. And the next subheading is explaining. You will have perhaps observed that the stress in recent verses has been on how we must guard mindfulness. Shantideva now moves on to how we must utilize mindfulness as a means of protecting introspection. So he's sort of moving around those two from verse to verse, looking at their interrelationship. Sometimes he's foregrounding mindfulness, protecting vigilance. Other times he's foregrounding vigilance, protecting mindfulness. The point is we can't take them away from each other. Gyaltsabje presents three subdivisions. Relying on the outer condition of a virtuous friend, how to generate the inner conditions of correct mental application, and how to generate the inner conditions of mindfulness and introspection. So the first of these is rely on the outer condition of a virtuous friend. This pertains to verse 30, which reads, through staying in the company of spiritual masters, through the instructions of abbots, and through fear, mindfulness will easily be generated in fortunate people who practice. This is a very intriguing verse. Putting our gurus and fear in the same line might invoke some curiosity, if not concern. But that is not Shantideva's purpose, because his intent is to indicate how the outer condition of the virtuous friend, together with their instructions, can be usefully combined with a healthy fear of what lies in wait if we don't practice in a coherent and effective manner. As Geshe Jumpa Gatso puts it, through abiding in the company of gurus, through receiving teachings and instructions from abbots and so forth, through fear of having transgressed our gurus and abbots' instructions, fortunate people who have respect will quickly generate mindfulness. So being in the presence of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, for example, immediately creates a powerful catalyst for developing states of acute mindfulness, because it's almost like a mirror reflection back on the state of our own mind, an inverse mirror reflection. We're suddenly able to see vividly what's going on in here and begin to work with it. But more particularly in the context of Shantideva's bodhicitta framework, it's an indication that we need to preserve the precepts we have taken, such as the bodhicitta vows, for example, under the guidance of our teacher, together with the implications of what might happen if we let those precepts lapse or deteriorate. In other words, we must be stimulated to practice precisely because we can comprehend the implication of breaking our vows in both personal and intrapersonal terms, meaning privately and publicly. Considered in this comprehensive way, we can now appreciate how staying in the company of spiritual masters and esteemed abbots, etc., works as an extremely powerful catalyst for protecting our mindfulness so that it does not waver. As Gyaltsabje says, the fortunate ones respect the trainings and will follow the advice of their abbot, preceptor, friends, in pure training and the like, out of a feeling of shame and consideration and fear of being degraded by others. These are methods for protecting mindfulness. Gyaltsabje continues, since they generate easily the mindfulness that does not forget the virtuous object, regardless of whether they listen, contemplate, or meditate, they base their practice on mastering mindfulness. We have to master mindfulness. I thought here to comment a little on the sudden invocation of shame and embarrassment in Gyaltsabje's description there. Geshe Doga, for his part, indicates that in the context of this verse, we are to distinguish shame from embarrassment in the following manner. Geshe Doga says, the difference between shame and embarrassment is the focus of one's commitment to others, such as one's lamas and Buddhas, etc. If one avoids engaging in faults that would cause disgrace to those others, this is shame. So we develop shame in relationship to failing and disappointing our preceptor. It's shameful. Embarrassment arises because an action is not good for one's own reason. So this is an intrapersonal reason, not one in relation to the exterior object of the guru in this case. It is not good for me to break these vows. This uses oneself as a reason to avoid faults in consideration for others. So both shame and consideration, says Geshe Doga, are two very important virtues we need to maintain. Consideration in this context might be considered a mechanism or a device of embarrassment, because it's through the force of embarrassment, rising from strong internal feelings that we have failed to maintain our practice well, in our own terms even, that we generate consideration as a mechanism not to give rise to such an internal collapse or fall of our moral structure again or in the future. We try to galvanize our resolve internally to practice. And so our embarrassment shakes us up into awareness of the need to do that. Such consideration in turn is intimately connected with or intricately interwoven with a respect and admiration for our guru, I'm not talking about myself here as a guru, by the way, I'm a student. I'm talking about how we relate to our precious gurus here. We look up to them. We respect them. Shame differs in aspect because the exemplary outer manifestation of presence, as manifested in the example of the guru, acts as a yardstick by which to measure our own achievement or our own loss of achievement in regards to our capacity to be mindful of virtuous objects. So I'm trying to describe the sort of psychological structure here that works. You see here that this radically reconfigures the customary idea that we just simply prostrate to a holy object and hope that the good nectar pours into our waiting vessel, because it's saying that in that relationship, that respectful relationship with our teacher, we're actually enabling ourselves to measure out what it is that needs to be done here. This is so important. And so the teacher is manifesting a situation for us, a structural situation, if you like, where we're suddenly able to restructure our habitual approach to our own rising afflictions. This is really quite special to think about. But it takes away the kind of magic wow factor from these possible relationships. We don't get sort of overwhelmed by mystical thoughts here. We're having to return to the nitty-gritty of transforming our own minds. That's why we're in the presence of our teacher here as an exemplary practitioner. So Geshe Doga extrapolates that just as we feel shame in relation to the outer condition of the guru, we might also feel shame in relation to the outer conditions composed of our family and friends. This is very, very interesting, isn't it? It means that our family and friends can operate as our gurus, because if we find ourselves shamed by having failed them in some capacity or care, it's exactly the same point being pointed out that the guru is pointing out. And we suddenly have to take responsibility for what's happening here. And so that's why we often think that, you know, my friend is my inseparable from my teacher. Caring for my family is so incredibly special. Those objects are so special to respect, deeply respect, because of their capacity to assist in our own spiritual practice, so that we can actually give back to others in a real and reliable way. So this indicates, if you like, that there can even be certain perils in choosing to practice away from the view of others, such as in a far-off mountain cave. And I just want to tell a personal story here. Years and years ago, I was in Dharamsala to receive teachings from His Holiness the Dalai Lama, along with many, many thousands of others, of course. So it was, a big, big public event in His Holiness's temple. And the teaching was going on for a number of days. And I was staying in the village below Tushita at that time, because Tushita was full. And I would go for a stroll in the big lunch break on the mountainside of McLeod Ganj. And I came upon some little huts on the side of the road, and a monk meditator came out, and he was quite agitated, appearing agitated, and he wanted to know whether His Holiness was teaching at the moment down at the temple. He'd obviously been in solitary retreat, or quite a long retreat. And because I had insufficient Tibetan and he had no English, I could not communicate successfully what was happening in the village. And he became more and more and more upset, and finally swung around on his meditator's heel and stormed back into his retreat hut. So I often have thought about that example as a cautionary tale of being alone in our practice, because just alone, because in a way we're not able to test ourselves, put ourselves in a situation where we're truly and effectively challenged to find out whether or not we will give rise to an afflicted mind or not. I'm not saying we should go into situations where we deliberately get an afflicted mind in order not to have one, but unless we're tested, we're not going to know to what extent or what capacity we still have afflicted minds. So there's another famous Lamrim story, of course, of the meditator who comes down to the marketplace, and he's told by a clairvoyant Kadampa master, eat shit, or something along those lines. And the meditator flies into a rage and storms off, and only realizes later that the guru had pointed out the problem that was occurring in his mind that he wasn't sort of taking control of. So identification of failure to have sufficient shame or consideration is also to be found in the context of the four binding factors. I'm just indicating this for those who might hold bodhicitta vows. So those four binding factors are not regarding these as detrimental, not forsaking the wish to repeat such behavior, delighting and taking pleasure in them, and having no shame or consideration. So, as Asanga says in his Bodhisattva Bhumi, when the basis for committing any of these acts, referring to non-virtues, is such that a bodhisattva does not develop even a small amount of shame and abashment because he or she has engaged continually in these four acts that represent an extreme form of defeat, meaning that they'll lose the entirety of the bodhisattva vows. And due to the lack of embarrassment and shame, he or she is both pleased with and delights in that conduct. And he or she looks upon that conduct, that very conduct, as a good quality. And this should be understood, says Asanga, as constituting a great perturbation, a great downfall. So the lack of shame and embarrassment as functioning entities in our lives can lead to a kind of breakage of our system of ethics very, very easily, because we're able to open the door to the afflicted minds in an unrestrained way, unopposed way. From this, we can appreciate that a lack of even a small amount of shame and embarrassment is not just a lack of desired qualities, meaning desired qualities are equal to the absence of that portion of shame or embarrassment, but rather it is an actual protagonist dynamically assisting in the execution of a moral downfall. It's culpable, not just an absence. A great perturbation mentioned, therefore, is another way of describing a severe defilement or a gross downfall of a root bodhisattva vow. So I just mention these points as they are critical in helping us to develop a real capacity to safeguard our mind, particularly from losses and breakages of important vows and pledges that we might have taken. So the next heading is how to generate the inner condition of correct mental application. And this refers to verse 31. I am ever dwelling in the presence of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas who are always endowed with unobstructed vision. Geshe Doga describes this as a proclamation, or what we should recall, a declaration of what we should recall. Hence the use of speech marks, you'll notice, in Berzon's translation. It is our own proclamation to ourselves. We're thinking, I am ever dwelling in the presence of all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas who are always endowed with unobstructed vision. The logic of how this lies or ties in with the issues we've been exploring is immediately apparent. Because the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are always witnesses to our every action, whether internal or external, and see without obstruction, without bias or distortion, it is obvious that we should see fit to generate the inner condition of correct mental application, not just right away, but at all times. And of course, I could add here, at all times, especially when we're not aware that someone is witnessing our action. In those moments, wake up, yes, someone is witnessing our action, the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Therefore, mindfulness and introspection should kick in, shame and embarrassment should kick in. Just as we wouldn't brutally harm another sentient being when in the presence of valid moral observers, so we shouldn't at any time or in any way, because the valid moral observers in the forms of the all-knowing Buddhas and clairvoyant and highly realized Bodhisattvas are always watching us. Even our presumably discrete negative thoughts are blatantly obvious and apparent to them. Hence, in this verse, as Gyaltsab Sabje indicates, we have an extension of the topic of shame as a cautionary device. Gyaltsab Sabje says, further, the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas can see all phenomena without obstruction, regardless of place and time. So one remains at all time clearly in the sight of their five eyes. Considering this generates shame, which takes oneself as the reason. And because one has respect for the teacher and the Dharma and the fear of the fruition, one should take care and practice mindfulness. This reference to five eyes might seem a little perplexing, only because Berzon doesn't directly translate it as such. Rather, he refers to unobstructed wisdom, which amounts to the same thing, but perhaps a little less evocatively. The Padmakara translation of this verse reads, the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas both possess unclouded vision, seeing everything lies open to their gaze. And likewise, I am always in their presence. But the Venerable Michael Yeshe's translation for Geshe Doga is even more explicit. Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are endowed with unobstructed sight of everything, so I'm always in the field of vision of their five eyes. End of quote. Then the next two lines of the next verse follow on. And again, in the Venerable Michael Yeshe's translation read, by contemplating this, shame and likewise respect and fear are attained. So Berzon's translation of 32 reads, one who has such thoughts as these will gain devotion and a sense of fear and shame. For such a one, the memory of Buddha rises frequently before the mind. So because we are suspended, as it were, between the open gaze of the holy ones on the one side and our own awareness that we are constantly being accompanied by them on the other side, we have little scope, if you like, little opportunity to give rise to undisciplined or unbridled afflictive emotions. This is because such awareness of their acute awareness functions as a supreme proxy, as it were. We naturally generate shame, respect, and fear of breaking our vows because we recognize we're in the constant observation of our esteemed spiritual teachers. This points, of course, to one of the important values in having deep regard and frequently recollecting the three holy refuge objects. It's not my unique practice at all, but it is an important practice, part of a sort of Nundro practice, even to recite the refuge formula over and over and over and over as a mantra as one goes about one's daily affairs for this reason. Geshe Doga's summary, to summarize the main point, recalling one's mind that the Buddhas are omniscient. This means they know all existence completely and entirely, past, present, and future. Think, I'm always in their presence, and so I dare not engage in misdeeds, lapse from my commitments, etc. This recollection in one's own mind is how our mindfulness is supported by introspection. End of quote. So this is really key advice. We should always, meaning frequently, over and over, remember the Buddhas before our minds. And I'm returning to that mirror image again here. In this way, our virtues and non-virtues are mirrored back in an acutely vivid and potent form. If we feel while acting we are face to face with the holy ones, we will have little capacity to run amok or astray. This is really incredibly important advice. We tend to get up to our mischief, our deluded mischief, when we feel that no one is going to be taking us to task. We're going to get away with it because no one's witnessing it, but it's not the case. The last two lines of verse 32 actually fall under Gyaltsab Sabje's next subheading, how to generate the inner conditions of mindfulness and introspection, which has two subdivisions, how to generate mindfulness and how to generate introspection from mindfulness. Therefore, how to generate mindfulness pertains to the two lines. For such a one, the memory of the Buddha rises frequently before the mind. Put another way, mindfulness of the Buddha invariably leads to mindfulness of the quality and virtues, activities of our own mind. It therefore logically follows that the more often we recollect the Buddha, the more likely we are to be maintaining mindfulness in regards to our own mind. So I think I've covered those points sufficiently. But there's another way of presenting a causal logic here. Because we recollect the qualities of the Buddha jewel, we remember the qualities of the Dharma jewel. And because we remember the qualities of the Dharma jewel, we recollect the qualities of those who live perfectly in the Dharma, the Sangha community. This is a very profound stream of associations, one that Gyaltsab Sabje renders explicitly when he says, a person who thinks in this way will also recollect the qualities of the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Because of this happens repeatedly, they'll easily generate mindfulness of the three jewels. So one's mind becomes more and more attuned to the three jewels in this way. And therefore our refuge, the meaning of our refuge, is truly supported And additionally, and for exactly the same reasons, our observation of our own morality, our own moral behavior, is properly and truly supported. This is for the reasons outlined earlier regarding remembering the Buddha, Dharma, and the Sangha, and their association with shame and embarrassment. So, His Holiness, in relation to verses 30 and 31, says, or summarizes, as we develop mindfulness, never forgetting what to do and what to avoid, attentiveness gradually becomes part of us. So His Holiness here is indicating the power of familiarization. The more we practice as Shantideva is describing, the more we will develop, and therefore the more easily realizations and therefore beneficial personal transformations will come. So we're now arriving at verse 33, how to generate introspection from mindfulness. When mindfulness is stationed as a sentinel, a guard upon the threshold of the mind, mental scrutiny is likewise present, returning when forgotten or dispersed. So it's perhaps necessary to again describe what is meant by mindfulness and mental scrutiny in the context of this verse. As Gotsamje clearly says, at the time when one, through mindfulness, remains alert to protect oneself from the afflictions, then introspection, which I just mentioned is translated as mental scrutiny in bachelors, which analyzes which action is suitable and unsuitable, comes into existence, and that which has degenerated at a time will return. So mindfulness, therefore, refers to our state of ever-ready alertness, which is able to comprehend the contents of our mind as they existentially arise. In other words, we're being mindful of our mind, what exactly it is getting up to in any given moment. Geshe-Doga indicates mindfulness here relates to being either mindful of a virtuous object or mindful of what is to be adopted and what is to be discarded. So mindfulness means being alert to the possibility of afflictions arising and thus protecting oneself from them. This, he says, is a really most significant point about applying mindfulness. So mindfulness here has been seen as a sentinel, a primary sentinel, because it means that we can be dynamically and freshly conscious of what is to be adopted and what is to be abandoned, namely the arising of various mental states, whether they're afflicted or unafflicted. If our mindfulness is deficient or lapses, we'll allow the afflictions to take root and then unfurl unobstructed because they are not being scrutinized, that is, being keenly watched. So vigilance comes into play as well. In the great collection of mind training texts, these are topics frequently discussed and emphasized. For example, the great Kadampa yogi and master Ben Gungyul says, quote, I have no other task than to stand guard with a short spear of antidote at the entrance of my mind. When they, the afflictions, are vigilant, meaning being held in vigilance, I too am vigilant. When they are relaxed, I too am relaxed. So we rise and fall with the strength of these minds according to our assessment of the situation. We don't have to always be astonishingly, tensely vigilant in case something goes wrong or out of kilter like this, because that will create havoc physiologically, if nothing else. Will damage our nervous system. We won't be able to sleep. We'll become irritable and we'll start messing up. That's not what we're asking at all. These minds are very, very subtle and very discreet, and we work with them. We play with them in a creative manner according to situations and circumstances. We can become very, very skillful and deft in our approach. So Ben Gungal also says you should be vigilant and strike at the snout of each boar, meaning a pig with tusks, with a cane and chase it. I'll read that again, it's rather wonderful. You should be vigilant and strike at the snout of each boar with a cane and chase it. So you hit it full on with mindfulness, you're aware of it, and then you banish it. You take action, and that requires vigilance, knowing exactly what it is you need to do through discrimination. Likewise, when Geshe Ben observed the arisal of disturbing thoughts in his own mind, he would grab his hand and shout out, "Get out of this door! Get out of this door!" This is a particularly significant or poignant story because there's a significance as to why he grabbed his hand. Prior to his conversion to Dharma, he was a robber and a thief, a feared one, and would often find himself in those days reaching out his hand instinctively to steal something because of his past habituation to stealing. So I don't know if any of us are stealers, but the idea is that the object appears so alluring that because we've trained ourselves into obtaining our forbidden object, meaning an object belonging to someone else, as our own, which of course is a moral transgression, we already find ourselves reaching for it, even though we haven't necessarily consciously decided to steal. And you might think that's a farcical or kind of extreme account of circumstances, but supermarket researchers, oddly enough, find exactly the same thing happens in the shopping aisle. That if they put some monitors on people's sort of brain, craniums, and they can indicate that they become stimulated and their musculature in their arm becomes prepared for action to reach and touch a particular item on the shelf before they've consciously realized that that's the item they've chosen to purchase. I just mentioned that. So instinct here isn't coming from its own side. It's because we've acclimatized ourselves to behaviors so continuously. So grabbing his own hand, which is a mechanical agent or tool, isn't it, of his mind in this case, is very, very clever and effective because he's apprehending his hand as an agent which he needs to control because it's the agency of his thieving mind. So by apprehending the agent of the thieving mind, he's also controlling the thieving mind. So I just wanted to suggest here in a kind of light-hearted way that connecting virtue and virtuous and non-virtuous inclinations to physical situations is quite valuable. In fact, very valuable. And that's one of the reasons why when we see our teacher approaching in the distance, looking at this traditionally, we raise our hands to our head as a sign of respect. And that physical action imprints itself in a way that is stronger than just thinking, oh, there's my wonderful teacher appearing. So you can see here that Geshe Ben's doing the inverse of that. He's not showing respect for his thieving mind. He's showing shock and horror. So he's rejecting his hand instead of embracing it. So I just mentioned that. So it's the same thing yesterday or the last teaching session. I dropped my mala and I returned it to the crown of my head for exactly that reason, because that's the flip side of my negligent mind, my careless mind, which had dropped the mala to being blessed by Kabja Zopa Rinpoche and other precious teachers. So I had to attempt to restore that situation by flipping it onto itself and using my body and my head in this case as a kind of technique for doing that. So it becomes more powerful. So we can invent our own little playful rituals in this way. No one else need know about them, of course. And so it's very helpful to regard the mind as a doorway, observing whatever comes in and whatever goes out. And it is also very helpful to relate a physical gesture to our thoughts to more deeply imprint them in a positive way. Introspection, on the other hand, though thoroughly dependent upon the data, if you like, that mindfulness is offering or supplying, is endowed with a particular capacity in that it's able to delve into, scrutinize those mental contents, navigate through them, as it were, critically, meaning analytically, evaluating what is suitable to be dismissed and what is suitable to be adopted. So there's a kind of judgmental role happening there. In other words, it's a capacity of acute discrimination, which can sift virtuous from non-virtuous minds and then incline us towards holding on to the virtuous ones and getting rid of the others. So that's why Shantideva says mental scrutiny is likewise present. Can't leave it out. That His Holiness gives an extensive commentary on this verse, referring to verse 33, indicates its incredible importance. His Holiness says, attentiveness should be applied to everything we do, and at all times we should be aware of our physical behaviour, constantly checking whether we have been successful in doing what is proper and avoiding what is not. In this way, the mind, like a drunken elephant, maddened by the three poisons, will be tied to the pillar of positive actions with the rope of mindfulness and tamed with the hook of attentiveness. If we are unable to keep the mind attuned to virtue all the time, we can let it rest in a neutral state, neither positive nor negative. But at all costs, let us avoid negative thoughts. In our meditation, when we're concentrating on specific objects, we need to be attentive and mindful all the more, for such concentration should not be distracted even by positive thoughts, let alone neutral or negative ones. So His Holiness is pointing out that our Bodhisattva practice demands and requires an intelligently skillful maneuverability, a capacity to adapt in the best and most appropriate way according to emerging circumstances. In other words, he's asking us to be flexible. This is important, as otherwise we might somehow become painfully constricted or even blinkered by the need to always practice appropriately according to the book. For the reality of the complexity of our lives, I'm wanting to suggest, is such that, as His Holiness puts it, in all circumstances, it is necessary to evaluate the need for particular action in relation to the precepts. So I emphasize that last part, in relation to the precepts. example is giving a strategically, is an example would be ourselves strategically telling a lie to an assailant who is asking, had we seen his quarry run past? Because in this case, compassion, according to our Bodhicitta commitment, outweighs literal truth. It outweighs telling the truth, which is one of our other vows in this particular situation. We do tell a lie because it enables the victim, the intended victim, to escape, to get away. So we decide that that's of greater value, greater purpose. So His Holiness elaborates this very subtle point, and it's one that I mention has to be approached very carefully so that we don't lead ourselves astray by thinking we've got sort of open and largesse to make up anything we like as we go along. It's not the case at all. His Holiness says, although bodhisattvas may be concentrating on one particular practice, they must be able to put it aside temporarily in favour of such circumstances as participating in ceremonies that benefit others, performing acts of generosity, protecting themselves if their lives are in danger, giving teachings, or accumulating merits and helping others to do so. And then he gives that famous example. For example, if a hunter were in pursuit of a deer, were to ask if we had seen his quarry, it would be entirely admissible, in order to save the deer's life, to tell him untruthfully that we have not seen it. Here, we would be giving precedence to the generosity of protecting from danger over the discipline of not telling lies. So in other words, we need to evaluate such situations carefully, and we can't do this without mindfulness and alertness. So to be vigilant and mindful doesn't mean that we have to become like a robot or an automaton, painfully constrained by a network of rules and regulations, injunctions even, that will somehow cripple or hinder our capacity to adapt to circumstances. I mention this as it's often a misconception found in Western takes on just what it is that Buddhist practice involves. When we are not being required as Buddhist practitioners to become passive objects of our own stern parental observation, if you'll allow me to mix disciplinary metaphors. But we are required to be fully cognizant and fully informed. I just mentioned this. I think, if we're looking at this in psychoanalytic terms, we'd say that we're in danger sometimes of having a overly developed superego. We're so aware of being morally good and obedient that we can't grow, can't act. We become fearful, so fearful of the response of others and the need to please them that we're unable to take any initiatives on our own. So this is clearly a problem. So we need to take ownership of ourselves. So His Holiness lays this out very clearly. He says it is important to be sure of our practice, clearing up all doubts and making certain that we've understood everything correctly. This confidence in the practice is to be based on clear reasoning and faith, determination and stability, and respect for the practice we are doing. Our actions should be guided by our own conscience, by concern for what others might think, and by the dread of the consequences of negative actions. Keeping our senses under control, let us be peaceful and try to make others happy. So I won't continue on to the next topic today, but we're going to be diving headfirst into the three kinds of morality. which coincides with the presentation in the Lam Rim. And this constant resonance between the Lam Rim and Shantideva is something to be always borne in mind, so that we can move from one to the other in a completely continuous way, supporting each of those two fields of study as we go. They're both doing the same thing. And it's very, very powerful way of studying Shantideva's great text, to read the Lam Rim at the same time. So I'll throw it open for any comments or questions, and we have a little bit of time left. Anyone would like to offer? Stephen.
Oh, thank you, Ross. Thank you for another great talk. It was just that last sentence that you read from His Holiness. Our action should be guided by our own conscience, by concern for what others might think. And so we're encapsulating shame and embarrassment.
Yeah.
And by dread of and so in a way, that's kind of, the parental oversight, I think, that perhaps you were referring to, the function of the superego.
Yeah.
And then by dread of the consequences of negative actions, having a scientific training or an engineering training, I think in terms of, science and universal laws. And to me, karma has that same status. And that even when I'm alone, I'm still making karma.
Mm-hmm.
I can't escape it in any way. It's inescapable. It's implacable. And that also, I find that helps me as well as, having kind of an external perspective of, the Buddhas, the Bodhisattvas, my fellow students, my teachers, and so on. And the internal perspective of how would I feel if I did that? So that's more kind of a comment than a question.
I think it's all very, very true and very real, isn't it? This idea of a conscience is a fascinating one, because we're enshrining that on the throne of the potential for self-transformation towards enlightenment. It's something that we're responsible for maintaining. Our conscience is our conscience. It's our stuff. It's made up by us. It's our work, our product. And because of that, we have full capacity to work with it, because it's already there in our mind as a form of processing, as you described so vividly, all of those networks and situations in which we're immersed, of which are very complicated potentially, often too. We often get into very dense and difficult situations. But our conscience, if it's intact and healthy and vital, can respond to situations as they arise in an appropriate manner, because we've developed it through our cultivation of ethical practice in the past. And so ethics, again, talking your sort of image of outside and inside, I feel it's very important to bring ethics in, rather than seeing them as something that's being applied to us externally. And I know that's embedded in your presentation, because ethics is describing the actual mode of behavior. How is it unfolding? That is where our ethics lie. It's what is happening at that level. And we can talk about natural ethics and so forth, and other ways of discussing these topics. But the crucial thing here in relation to conscience stands. So you should be guided by our own conscience. I think His Holiness there is giving us some liberty, some room, wriggle room, if you like, to adapt within the framework of our various vows and commitments, to working with situations in an appropriately precise manner as they arise. I find that really, really an exciting prospect, but it's only one that we can safely do when we're thoroughly grounded in our practice, which is why Sonia says it is important to be sure of our practice. We have to know what's involved and what we're doing in the bigger framework in order to start finessing things at that level. Yeah, says it. Do you want to add to that, Stephen?
Yeah, thanks for that explanation, Ross. And it just kind of, this image popped into my mind. Maybe I'm watching too much news. But now in this country, there's a huge discussion over what is a permissible crime that can be committed officially versus an impermissible crime that that isn't allowed. It's, to me,
We
it's
shouldn't be
boggling.
laughing,
It's
but
also the same thing between, the difference between morality and ethics. Like you were pointing at, Ross. I mean, either you're ethical or moral or not. And
yeah.
to see that maybe I'm just naive, but I don't know. I think it all does come down to individual morality.
I think so. Yeah, I just think of your president at the moment seeking immunity from any ethical responsibility whatsoever while being president. It's an alarming prospect that's been sketched there, and the Supreme Court is intimately involved in how this is going to play out. And they're already, as you know, of course, wary of the problem of precedents, because it's going to give potentially permission for mad emperors to run amok in the future. And it's a very, very interesting moment in American social politics indeed. But that's, having said that, whether something's right or wrong here isn't according to how that's been judged by others ultimately at all, as you're pointing out. It's the implication of the action that determines that. So that's why Shantideva is going to move on in the next verses to talking about picking up our motivation first. That's the snout of the boar that Geshe Ben was talking about. We hit that on the head with a stick, because if we're about to generate a negative thought, we have that capacity to avert it at an early stage. So we'll go into this in more detail. But the point is, that's because it's a mind generation that we're working with. And that's going to lead to actions of body and speech. So in terms of crude, more rough ethics, if you like, it's advised that we at least control our bodies from harming others. And then better than that is to control our speech as well. And even better than that is to control our minds. Because if we control our minds, as Shantideva pointed out with his beautiful leather on the ground analogy, if we develop patience, we can cover the earth with leather. We can no longer be pricked by thorns. If we protect our mind from harmful intent, then we've protected the entirety of our moral behavior. Everything flows from there. So I think the fact that His Holiness is also asking us to know when to relax is important, because we can become really earnest and anxious about these things, because we might recognize that our mind often is running somewhat astray, and we become a little bit disturbed or disappointed in our progress or lack thereof. His Holiness is saying there are situations when we don't have to worry about a non-virtuous thought. And in those moments, just relax. But you'll be there in a flash if you need to, because you've trained in conscientiousness in the way that His Holiness is describing. So we might finish there. It's interesting, isn't it, how Shantideva's talked about the benefits of bodhicitta, and he's progressively zeroing in on how we are to become bodhisattvas, how we have to engage ourselves. And that's why we invariably come upon this crucial topic of ethical behavior. And there's nothing more important to consider. So I'll hand over to Lou to lead our concluding prayers. Thank you.
Dedication prayers. For as long as space endures, and for as long as living beings remain, until then may I too abide to dispel the misery of the world. May all the pains of living creatures ripen solely upon myself, and through the might of the Bodhisattva Sangha, may all beings experience happiness. May the teachings which are the sole medicine for suffering and the origin of every joy be materially supported and honored and abide for a very long time. I prostrate to Menjigoshu, through whose kindness wholesome minds ensue, and I prostrate to my spiritual masters, through whose kindness I develop. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha, lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow. May that which has arisen never diminish, but increase more and more. May my venerable Lama's life be firm, his right divine action spread in the 10 directions, dispelling the darkness of all beings in the 3 realms. Long life prayer for His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of physical benefit and happiness in this world, the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All-powerful Chen Rezu Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until cyclic existence is ended. Long life prayer for His Holiness. A prayer for the swift return of Lama Zopa Rinpoche. Peerless teacher and assembly of children of victorious ones, Shravakas, Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang father and sons, together with your lineage, all the opposite of refuge of the infinite lands, please now bestow the virgin goodness to accomplish this prayer. In holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you are the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable Venerable Guru, to you I make request. Soul gateway with which all benefit and happiness emerge, while striving exclusively for the welfare of the victorious one's teachings, and mother living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. At this I lost hope. Nevertheless, to the undeceiving truth, and the blessings of the ocean of 3 jewels, the great waves of the mind generation of the children of the victorious ones, with a smile of a new reincarnation, swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples.
Thank you, everyone. Take care, and I'll see you next week.